Okay, now we're going to discuss another Sumerian creation myth about the debate between winter and summer. Oddly, whenever I was a kid studying all of this, for the second time I went through it actually, for a D&D campaign thing that I was reading about, it was right about winter time. And I remember after reading about this, within a day or two, there was that claymation animation version of a winter tale that has I'm Mr. Heat Miser, I'm Mr. Steam, and then there's winter and summer, and they have this debate on whether they're going to let the kids have a winter or a white winter or a white Christmas that year and let everything go with it. And of course, this was already starting to be the times of Earth Day and so on. This was the summer of '79 going into 1980, if I remember correctly. And I remember deeply wanting for there to be Christmas. For before we had moved to Northeast Texas, we had lived to the last of Dad's stature in the service, and he was in Omaha, Nebraska, and before that in Shimmy, Alaska. So we were well familiar with having very good winters and riding in sleds, and I remember being a kid and actually having so much drifts of snow up against the house we could dig into it and around the side of the house, prop open the basement window and get it warm in there, and like an igloo it stayed completely warm. And we played with GI Joes and all kinds of stuff and winter forts and things like that. And the hippie kids in the base housing there built the largest snowman I've ever seen in my life. And of course, being a kid, I thought it was bigger than it was. As we remembered talking about it later, it was about a story and a half tall. But I remember the I'm Mr. Heat Miser and how they had the debate go back and forth. And that's kind of what this is about as we reveal more about ancient Sumerian beliefs and the ways they went into it. And you'd think that everything just goes pat perfect and see, this is that and that is that. Well, if we look at a lot of my videos, you can see it doesn't work out that way. But if you have to look at it from certain points of view, and then all of a sudden things start to line up a little bit and you make connections. But some of the things like this right here are somewhat philosophical, and they're debates and the yin and yang of time and the way things go down. But in some of these also, there are myths, and some of them, the myths are actually related to people who once existed and did things. And in other words, it is a professed person of perfection somewhat, and something to aspire to. There are 7 debate topics known from the Sumerian literature falling into the category of disputations. Some examples are debates between sheep and grain, debates between birds and fish, trees and reeds, between silver and copper, etc. These topics came along after writing in Sumeria. They debate philosophical and address humanity's place in this world. The first lines of the myths were discovered in the University of Museum Archaeological Anthropology catalog of the Babylonian selection, or CBS selection, of tablets. This one numbered 8310, from their excavations at the temple and the library at Nippur, what we also know of as Nibiru. This translation by George Aaron Barton in 1918 was published in the Sumerian religious text and Babylonian inscriptions, number 7, which was entitled A Hymn to Ibbi-Sin. Now this Ibbi-Sin here is the son of Shu-Sin, and we've talked about the Shu-Nun and how they work in ancient Egypt, and they were effectively like Anunnaki gods. But he was the king of Sumer and Akkad and the last king of Ur-3 dynasty, and he reigned from 2027 to about 2004 BC, or possibly breaking into 1900 BC. During his reign, the Sumerian Empire was attacked repeatedly by Amorites. As faith in Ibbi-Sin's leadership failed, Elam declared its sovereignty and actually kind of took over and things went from there. And but Ibicene is seen as an inglorious king by a lot of people. Barton describes himself, suggesting that the text had been composed during his lifetime. He committed the hymn provides a powerful statement for emperor worship in Ur at the time of composition, so it's leading to that form. Ibicen is still mentioned in the modern translation, for my king named by Nana, the son of Enlil, Ibicen, when he is arrayed in the kutir garment and the hersog garments. Now, this is a fancy ceremonial garments, and a hersog garment, strange for hersog means mountain, we've talked about before in these, and so they talk about a mountain garment. A lot of people say this might have had mountain representations in its weaving of its fabric or in its coloration and so on. Looked like little pyramids and bigger pyramids going around it and so on, and this would have been a hersog or a mountain type garment. But a lot of conjecture. I'm not going to read this next part, for it just tells you that it's a collection and which tablets and all these things that it's going into. But the story itself. The story makes the form of a contest point between two cultural entities, first identified by Kramer originally as vegetation gods, Emesh and Eten. These were later identified with the natural phenomenon of summer and winter. Respectively, the location and occasion of the story is described in the introduction with the usual creation sequence of day and night, food and fertility, weather and seasons, and sluice gates for irrigation. I have to mention something I didn't mention at the very first part of it now. For that year that I was hearing all this and studying this stuff and everything, I was really praying for a hard winter so we could have one like we used to have and hear the songs, and can't we have a white Christmas like we used to, and talk to my parents. Well, we have them back and forth and this, that, and the other, and we'll have one of these years. Well, that year, if you look back into it, was an incredible winter. We had somewhat of a blizzard for North America, and it was really thick snow, not just some ice storm. And the streets did freeze all over and everything, but then so much snow came after it, we were able to build ice forts and a long duration through the Christmas layoff. And in fact, we were late going back to school and so on off of it. But extra in that too was the fact that that following summer was one of the worst summers on North Texas's records. We had so many above 110-degree days in a row, and people died, and all kinds of things happened too. But so let's look into this story here. On lifted his head in pride and brought forth a good day. He laid plans for Lacuna and spread the population wide. Enlil set his foot upon the earth like a great bull. Like the king, Enlil, the king of all lands, set his mind to increasing the good day of abundance, to making the night resplendent in celebration, to making flax grow, to making barley proliferate, to guaranteeing the spring floods at the quay, the making and the lengthening of misting, Lacuna, they're lengthening their days in abundance, to making summer close the sluices of heaven, and to making winter guaranteed plentiful water at the quay. So what this is describing is he is the great bull upon earth, but this is a sire, a bull that is the head bull, of course, as we know as the sire, and he's the one that's bringing forth all of these things. Once this connotation is put upon him and the great bull, you can see that that was carried on by everybody. And of course, during a time of Taurus, it was the iconography to use. And it's like, well, you're the one, right? But he's a sire, and you find that people like kings, they say, oh, sire, and everything. And so this is not just sir, but this is something that's been carried on in a thought for a long time, and how it works into the ideology of being a king over a people, or a great shepherd, if you will. So it talks about in there that he is increasing the good of the day in abundance and so on. And people somewhat have said, well, this is talking about during the summer, increasing of the daytime and daylight, but during the winter there's night, and this whole yin and yang that goes on. And that's what this fight's really about. This is the two seasons going at it each other. So let's look at it again. The two seasons are personified as brothers. Hint, hint. Born after Enlil copulates with a Hersog, or the great mountain. The destinies of Sumer and Winter are there to describe. Sumer founding towns and villages with plentiful harvest to bring. Winter brings spring floods. And that's the way that it all works. So whenever they say copulate and there's white stuff going all over these hills, that's snow. And that's the firmament. And it's very strong above and below. What's that mean? Well, that's the North Pole and the South Pole. But people took it to mean quite different things whenever the flood goes off. But that's for another video, or for the other one we had in the series. But it brings spring floods. And so someone wouldn't necessarily worship the spring so much as what is thought of today. But what brings about the spring is this hard winter, the yin and yang of things, that lays forth all of this snow that melts and brings forth spring rains along with it that keeps that river flowing. You notice how the Mississippi River doesn't ever go dry and then go big and go dry and go big. It keeps running because this happening per year, each one feeds each other like a yin and yang, and it goes back and forth. And so they're noticing this and they're using that together. But they're two brothers. Now he tells you he copulated with the great hills. He gave the mountain its share, a homina. He filled its womb with summer and winter, the plenitude of life in the land. As Enlil copulated with the earth, there was a roar like a bull's. Oh yeah, he called out. But he's the wind too, and there are roars and things, and go along with storms of winter that is seeding this situation too. So they're equating to that, and the roar of thunder of things. Okay, so the hills spent the day at that place, and at night she opened her loins. She bore summer and winter as smoothly as fine oil. So apparently it was an easily birth, but at the same time they're telling you that apparently in a day and a night this all happened, right? He copulates with her, and boom, well, there's a yin and yang of seasons and things like that that goes on. There's a season for a woman to be fertile too. There's all kinds of seasons to look at this in the way that they're talking about. So the plenitude and life of the land was created because of this seeding. Well, this is nothing more than the rains in the mountains that bring the thing, but everything is taken to a sexual connotation back then because it is Mother Nature doing its thing, right? It's part of the reason that a lot of this type of connotations weren't taken farther, for these people are trying to get more and more, I don't know which way to say, modest, I guess. And so in that fact, things that are talked about that are much in a modern day wouldn't be considered things that juveniles should be exposed to. Shouldn't just be read right out. That's the reason why they only pick certain stories from the Bible, because other ones really question a lot of things. So she bore them as smooth as oil, but he fed them pure plants in the terraces of the hills like great bulls. He nourished them in the pastures of the hills. Enlil set about determining the destinies of summer and winter. For summer, founding towns and villages, bringing in harvest and plenitude for the great mountain Enlil, sending laborers to the large arable tracts and working the fields with oxen for winter plenitude, for the spring floods, for the abundance of life in the land, placing grain in the fields and fruitful acres, and gathering in everything. Enlil determined these as the destinies of summer and winter. And so they're showing here this one great God thing, but they're also talking about the great mountain Enlil, and so they believe that air came down from the mountains and all these things, and we all breathe air. And if you go up to try to meet him, you'll run out of air. He'll choke you out. So you can't do this, and so you're meeting up into heaven. Well, we know if we tried to go up into heaven, there is no air there. Well, the ancients described it as a Milky Way or a river of life, and that's that river of life that everybody gets in a boat and goes through, just like the Egyptians and all these situations. And so that shows another connection that's been long before this is going on. This crap that's put together and taken in a certain direction is by a lot of other people put in a slightly different direction, but almost the same, showing you that its places were in place before this. The two brothers soon decide to take their gifts to Enlil's house, the Enamantilla. Now, there you get the ill of Illa and how that's deified, but that's house of creation. It's a sanctuary dedicated to Enlil, likely to have been located within the Kur, which is a sacred mountain at Nippur during the Akkadian Empire. It also referred to various other temples, including those later versions of Enlil, Marduk, and Bel or Baal. Right? So this God's house, house of life, house of bread, and this Bethel, which means the house of God. Bethlehem, house of God. Where does that come from? Oh, it comes from not the people that you think it does now and the way it goes, but it was kept, I guess you'd say. Ding. This is oddly reminiscent, too, of Cain and Abel, where they come in the house of God and the Eden thing, and they present their wares to him, and God likes one more than the other gets jealous and kills him, and the whole story goes there. This shows you where it's taken from. So little pieces of it. It doesn't work just like, hey, here's this puzzle piece. You got to read through this, and you go, if I put that kind of together, that's where they got that from. It seems to have been exactly its origins. The two brothers soon decide to take their gifts to Enlil's house, which is the house of life, or Imantilla, where they begin to debate about their relative merits. Now, Summer argues, so Mr. Heat Miser comes out, and he's Mr. 101. He tells that your straw bundles, so he's talking crap about the other guy and his virtues and so on. This is the way it goes. Your straw bundles are for the oven side, hearth and kiln. In other words, at the end of everything being cut good off the grain, they cut the other parts and use it to burn. So what good is it? Or da-da-da. But then again, isn't it valuable to light that thing up? And how many trees do they have in that area to do these things with? What are bundles? What's the ancient story of a fag, which is a bundle of sticks or thickets or straw? And then wasn't that used to burn witches and things? And this carried all the way through to modern day. So you can see this. But your straw bundles are for the oven side, hearth and kiln. Like a herdsman or a shepherd encumbered by sheep and lambs, helpless people run like sheep from oven side to kiln, and from kiln to oven side in the face of you. In sunshine, ... you reach decisions. But now in the city's people's teeth chatter because of you. When it gets cold and everybody, and they chatter and they long for the warmth of summer, they long for the warmth, they try to recreate this off this heat and kill inside. People want to hang around the oven and stuff, and hang around the hearth and so on. But he tells you that in sunshine, he puts that ... You wonder where I get a lot of that from. It's a more dramatic pause than a comma. I use commas too. Now to that, Winter replies, Father Enlil, you gave me control of irrigation. You brought plentiful water. I made one meadow adjacent to another, and I heaped high the granaries. The grain became thick in the furrows. Summer, a bragging field administrator who does not know the extent of their fields. My thighs grow tired from toils. Tribute has been produced for the king's palace. Winter admires the heart of your lacuna in words. So Enlil eventually intervenes and declares the winner of the debate is Winter. And there's a scene of reconciliation between the two. Like, okay, yeah, and Summer and Winter shake hands. They do that every year in spring and fall, by the way. Your turn, my turn, your turn, my turn. Bent Alster explains winter prevails over summer because winter provides the water that was so essential to agriculture in the hot climate of the ancient Mesopotamia, but also it ran the river just like it did in Egypt. And so those gods were very prominent. Just like in other areas that are relying on the storm gods and storms to make it happen, storm gods became extremely prevalent. And almost like a storm, ran through the area and took over other pantheons. Right? Like you see Jupiter. So, Enlil answers summer and winter. And he spoke to them both. Winter is controller of the life-giving waters of all land. The farmer of the gods produces everything. Summer, my son, how can you compare yourself to your brother, Winter? The import of the exalted word Enlil speaks is artfully wrought. The verdict he pronounces is one which cannot be altered. Who can change it? Summer bowed to Winter and offered him a prayer. In his house he prepared emmer beer and wine. At its side they spent a day at a succulent banquet. Summer presents Winter with gold, silver, and lapis lazuli. They pour out brotherhood and friendship like best oil, bringing sweet words to the quarrel. They have achieved harmony with each other. In the dispute between Summer and Winter, Winter, the faithful farmer of Enlil, was superior to Summer. Praise be to the great mountain, Father Enlil. And so we see here where, how can you compare yourself? So this is basically Cain and Abel, and the other one is shunned or whatever off of it somehow. And this caused a problem in your biblical tale. One killed the other, but we can also see that one is more needed versus the other to make it through the winter. The things that brought forth from that